Yes, it's time for The World This Week. 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. We are in the company of Anne Bagamary of the International New York Times. How are you?
Hello.
Also joining us, Pierre HASKI, co-founder of the news website Rue 89, 89th Street.
That's right. Good evening.
An allusion to 1789.
Absolutely.
Okay. Franco-Syrian photojournalist Ammar RABBO joins us. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you.
And Elena SERVETTAZ of sister station Radio France International's Russian language service. The World This Week, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24Debate. Cubans and Americans will long remember Wednesday, December 17th, 25 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, more than a half century after the first trade sanctions against Havana. Here, this is how Plantu, the cartoonist for French daily newspaper Le Monde, shows the normalization of ties, as you can see there, brokered by the Pope. There's the two Castro brothers, Barack Obama. I'm not sure it's a baby Jesus or a baby Che Guevara. In any case, the announcement made simultaneously by both countries.
Todos somos americanos. Change is hard in our own lives and in the lives of nations. And change is even harder when we carry the heavy weight of history on our shoulders. But today we are making these changes because it is the right thing to do.
And Bagamary, first of all, a political question here. Did you think Barack Obama had it in him to make that kind of a speech?
Yes, I did, actually. I think any president who is in his last term and has come through the midterm elections so his party doesn't have another election that he will have to help out with, I think he can find him in
should he have done this sooner, or should he was now the time?
Well, I'm not a political advisor, but looking at it from the outside, I'm sure that there are things he wanted to do after he was first reelected, after he was reelected 2 years ago, and he was advised, no, you really can't go quite that far yet because we do still have the midterms, and it is important that the Democrats hold on to what they can in Congress. Well, we know, though, that didn't happen. So now, really, all bets are off. It's time for his legacy. It's time for him to have a big finish to make people think that he really was a great president. There's plenty of evidence that he did a lot of what he set out to do. He was handed a bad hand, and he's made a lot of great moves on the economy. This is one more thing that can shore up his legacy. And frankly, for a president who's going to be judged on how well the American economy did, an opening to an enormous, untapped, pent-up market is a terrific masterstroke.
When you saw those simultaneous announcements made by Raul Castro and Barack Obama, what were you thinking about that?
Like everybody else, I think the Berlin Wall came to mind because that's the same kind of shattering event. But to come back to the point, I've been very critical of Barack Obama's foreign policy. I think he didn't really do as much as people expected him to do. I think on Israel and Palestine, he's been really a disgrace. But here, I think he did a great move. And I think, indeed, for his legacy, that's going to be an important move. The next one is Iran next year. And if he gets Iran and Cuba back in the among the friends of the U.S., I'm going a bit fast.
One would argue he's already kind of done that with Iran. I mean, there's
yes,
a lot of
but you need to formalize it and
no,
to have to reopen. The reopening of the U.S. embassy in Tehran is going to be quite an event.
Very true.
Then he will have left really a mark on America's foreign policy.
Ammar RABBO?
Yeah, I agree with Pierre. I mean, everybody was expecting him on Syria, for instance, and it was very disappointing. And then suddenly there is this historical move. Of course, we all can applaud. We all can be, say bravo to Obama. But on the other hand, on personal status, I'd say Cuba had this something very special because a bit out of time, with these old cars, with this ban on many things, etc. I'm afraid it might in a few years. I've never been there. I'd love to go there before it turns into Cancun or into something an American tourist nightmare. So probably better for the Cubans. This is what we'll see in the next year.
Your sentiment, by the way, shared by a lot of Canadians who travel there on vacation and say they fear that it might become another Cancun. Elena Servettaz.
I wanted to add, my father was in Cuba in 1989, and so he came back with a lot of stories. And for me, when I heard about this news, I was amazed that for the first time from 1961, I guess, American president speaks to Raul Castro, and Fidel Castro now he's 89 years old, and I was sure he would never be able to see this kind of move. So I agree that it's like the only possibility for Obama to make his legacy for the years he has to spend at power. But at the same time, we see how Republicans gonna react now. And if I don't mistaken, in Florida, this is a state where we have like 2.5 million from people who connected to Cuba, and this is a state which are never sure how it's gonna vote. It's Republican Democrats. So the Democrats will chase those, and Republicans will be I don't know, angry with Barack Obama.
That's a big part of the equation. Not everyone pleased the former Florida governor, and as of this week, 2016 presidential challenger Ned Bush, blasting what he calls a deal with the heinous Castro brothers, a sentiment echoed by another Sunshine State politician with presidential ambitions.
The White House has conceded everything and gained little. They gained no commitment on the part of the Cuban regime to freedom of press or freedom of speech or elections.
And BAGAMERY.
You know, I can't help when I hear Jeb Bush, when I hear Marco Rubio talk, I just can't help but think they are so stuck by having towed this Republican line. They are on the wrong side of this particular issue. They have to say what they do because they can't suddenly go back.
By the way, it's not clearly bipartisan, this issue.
No,
there are Republicans who are backing Obama, and there are Democrats who are against him.
That's right. This fellow Menendez, who's, I guess, head of the Foreign Relations Committee, is about to lose his seat once the new Congress takes over. But he's also said this is a bad move. Obama gave away the store. There's nothing. Yeah. But what else are they going to say? It's important, I think, to understand that when you talk about Cubans in the United States, you're talking the ones who tend to be the most anti-Castro are the ones who came at the beginning, the ones who lost the most. The younger, their children who are born in America and have just heard the stories around the dinner table, they're much more open to the idea of normalizing relations with Cuba. And the question is, which block of voters do you want to go after? Which one's bigger? Which one's more influential?
Pierre, HASKI?
I was going to say that the reports I heard from Miami were really this generational gap between the older Cubans who are really eager to see the communist regime fall, and the younger who are connected to people in Cuba through hip-hop, through music, through culture, and who don't really care about these old political quarrels and are happy to have the direct connections reestablished.
They want to make money. They want to sell their goods. They want to start companies. They want to form alliances with Cubans.
Anyway, European Union already canceled the ban many years ago. So why this reaction? Russia going to invest there, Chinese. Why Americans should lose this opportunity?
Elena Servettaz, you heard a while ago Ammar talking about the myth of Cuba. Growing up in what is now the former Soviet Union, how is Cuba perceived?
But of course, it's like I have like several different views, and I have a friend which is a very famous dissident, Alexander Podrobinik. And many years he was traveling there to help, poor people, and his passport was stolen. But each time he wanted to go and to fight and to help all these people. But what the memories my father brought from this, it was another world with a different life, and so we heard the story, which were sad for me, and we felt a kind of connection. And suddenly Russia say that they will abandon their like 32 billion, or I don't know how much, and Cuba going to be close to United States. It's really very surprising for us.
Anyway, on the myth of Cuba, I mean, we've always seen recently, I mean, in France, when you go in very rich areas, you see very elegant ladies wearing a Che Guevara bag or a Che Guevara T-shirt. I mean, I don't know exactly what's the myth of Cuba now, I mean, is it something trendy? Is it something fashionable? Is it something really history?
It's our 18-year-old.
Yeah, but if it's Cuba in the 50s where people went on their honeymoon and Sharon Stone went gambling with Robert De Niro in the movie, I mean, a lot of people, I think, would like to maybe recapture that. And I have a feeling that the global tourism business, as smart as it is, will know how to capitalize on what makes Cuba interesting while adding wonderful creature comforts that will allow global travelers to feel like they're having a great vacation. I have absolutely no doubt that the tourism industry has figured out how to make this work.
Invest in Hemingway, in rum, in
cigars.
in cigars.
Yep.
And actually, it's interesting because it's a French company who owns part of the rum business in Cuba, and their shares have been going up because the American market is going to open up to Cuban rum.
You're talking about rum. I was wondering if the famous Cuba Libre, the rum
Yes,
and
drink,
Coke, will still be fashionable or not.
Certainly the appropriate drink this week.
Yeah, it is definitely.
At first, the leaking of emails from Hollywood, from a Hollywood studio, Sony Pictures, was, well, an embarrassing tale of cutthroat water cooler talk among studio executives. Now, though, it's become what the White House calls a matter of national security.
Aaron, look at this.
Kim Jong-un wants to do an interview with Dave Skylark?
He's a fan. Look at him. If that ain't a real story, what is?
Okay, let's do it.
We're going to North Korea! Hello, North Korea!
Preceding the interview, you will shake Kim's hand with a fatal dose of poison.
Sony Pictures pulling that movie, the December 25th release of the interview, after movie houses didn't want the $44 million comedy about a plot to kill North Korea's president. Stars quick to react with outrage at distributors in the studio, saying this was giving in to terrorists. Who are the terrorists? The FBI blaming North Korea. There's still doubt about that. And there's a lot of indignation over the fact that this movie was taken out of movie houses.
Yeah, there are a lot of different ways to look at this issue. Let's start with Sony's and with the movie houses, okay? They're dealing with a regime about which nobody knows very much. Let's leave aside whether the movie should have been made, although it looked like a lot of fun. I mean, let's face it. I'm very sorry it's not going to be released because that clip made it look great. But you're the owner of a chain of movie theaters, and you're also Sony. You've been threatened now by a very shady power with violence, 9/11 style violence, if this movie is shown. You've got liability to think about. You've got public safety to think about. Who can really blame the executives for having said, you know what, we really do not want this blood on our hands. It's going to take we're going to take a big hit financially, but we really don't want to put this out there and risk what we think we're risking. You can say it was lack of courage. You can say it was greed. You can say it was any number of things. You can also look at it as a pretty courageous and sane move on their part. I'm not in their heads, but you can certainly see why they might have been cautious about, as I say, putting themselves out there and putting people at risk.
We have a comment on Facebook from Matteo. The United States is the land of freedom unless you make a movie about a fat dictator. Ammar RABBO, do you agree that it was the right call to pull that movie?
I never think that giving reason to terrorists, whatever they are, these are like cyber terrorists, or we don't know exactly what kind of terrorism it is, but I never think it is the right move. I wonder, I mean, it's very interesting to see how things moved in the last years. I mean, a few years ago, maybe a movie like Last Temptation of the Christ with the threats like this. In France, there was a theater that was bombed or burned. So with threats like this, maybe many films, I'm thinking about The Lady that talked about Aung San Suu Kyi in Burma, maybe many movies don't please many people. So what is the limit? Where do we stop? Where do we... I don't think it's a brave and courageous act.
The Last Temptation of Christ, Hail Mary by Jean-Luc Godard, these are films that were actively boycotted, and yet the movies were shown in theaters.
Yes, under police protection most of the time. But I think it's really a disgrace to have given in like that, because it's creating an incredible precedent for anyone who's displeased with a film now can make a Okay, we're going to bomb you 9/11 again so many times. And today we heard that Fox is dropping the adaptation of Guy Delisle. Guy Delisle is a very famous Paris-based Canadian maker of cartoons. He has a book called Pyongyang, based on his stay in North Korea. It was going to be adapted into a film by Fox in the US. They dropped the project today. So this is really opening a big gate into self-censorship, which is far worse than censorship, because you don't know where it starts, you don't know where it ends, and who's the next?
But we already see this many times with JP Morgan, I guess, with Kremlin website which been attacked. So it's not the first time and not the last time. So what I was thinking, what this story about Sony teaches us, that everybody in the world going to behave themselves in a very careful way. So each time you write an email, you will say, "Dear Mom," and so you are ready all this email to be published, as they say many times in New York Times, actually, I guess. But all these practices we already have during 15 years in Russia. So, we have this experience. So we are very careful. If you want to share information, you're going to call people, you're going to meet them in person. And that's how we do it.
When you turned on your screen this morning, Pierre, at work, did you think to yourself, I better watch what I write in emails?
Not really, but I know I'm not careful enough. And I think security is going to be coming into our heads more and more and more with this kind of stories. But there is one interesting aspect to it, which I haven't seen treated many times, is North Korea is the least computerized country in the world. The internet connections are almost inexistent. The number of
there are many who doubt the FBI's version.
How could North Korea pull such a coup?
Yeah.
And the FBI is also suggesting that it had some Chinese complicity or connections in doing it. And I think it's a very interesting aspect, is that today you have private companies, because they are operating like companies, who can be hired. You want to do a denial of service attack on the New York Times, you pay $1,000 and a company in Pakistan or in Kazakhstan or in China will do it for you. You just have to pay. And you want to steal Sony's emails, you just pay. And I think that's probably what happened, because North Korea is not known to have the skills to do that. And that's a new side and new face of the new threats that are affecting our world today.
Many saying that, well, it may or may not be North Korea, but these hackers, they should have just paid them off. And that's what's happened in the past a lot of times. The hackers have been subsequently employed by the companies that they hacked.
Sure, you have to identify them first and enter into negotiations with them. No, let me just say one thing, because everybody's against me on this. I'm not understanding why Sony and the distributors might have done this. Let me just turn it around. How, if you were Sony, how would you have released the film and then hired armed guards at the premiere? How have you handled this? I mean, they obviously thought it was a credible threat to viewers of this film. I mean, how would you handle it if you're Sony?
To be honest, I would have probably limited the amount of cinemas, theaters in which they would be played, and ensured security for those. But I think it's a kind of making a stand, and they've given in so easily. So maybe they know things that we don't know in terms of the kind of threat that were made, or maybe they have other emails of executives of Sony that haven't been released and which are like bombshells. But
and speaking of emails from executives, the boss of Sony Pictures, Scott Rudin, putting the rude in Rudin, when he talks about, for instance, he says about Angelina Jolie, "I'm not destroying my career." This is over the making of a remake of Cleopatra. "I'm not destroying my career over a minimally talented, spoiled brat who thought nothing of shoving this off her plate for 18 months so she could go direct a movie." Ammar Avid RABBO, as a photojournalist who's covered many a Cannes Film Festival, what's your reaction to this?
No, of course, it's the kind of comments you hear when it's off. When it's off the record, you hear a lot of things like this. But again,
it's a special atmosphere, isn't it? The movie industry.
It is, yes, definitely. It's a bit like fashion. it's a movie. I mean, it's a movie industry. It's also about entertainment. So it's very weird because you make a lot of money when you're entertaining people. So you have to entertain them, but on the other hand, you have to take money from their pocket into yours. So it's a bit a crook industry, you know, in a way or another. So. Yes, you hear a lot of things like that. To go back to the movie again, what is very funny. It's a comedy. I mean, it's a comedy, and we have this amount of reaction. Imagine you were talking about Angelina Jolie. You know, she made a movie about Daniel Pearl assassination. That was not a comedy. Imagine the threat was on a movie like this. What does it mean? Does it mean that tomorrow we won't do any movie that are controversial about maybe Al Qaeda or about Islam or about? It's very scary.
I do not think that will be the effect.
You know, about Kazakhstan. And it was forbidden in Kazakhstan.
Yes.
This funny movie with a nice comedy. It was forbidden.
Yeah. I don't think that will be the effect.
Sacha Baron Cohen.
You don't think that'll be the effect?
No, I don't. I think the movie industry will find a way around this. I mean, if they had simply not made it about Kim Jong-un, if they'd made it about a dictator with a fictitious name, this may not have happened. So maybe they will take that turn in the screenplays. Maybe the effect of this will be to say, this was a false threat. We gave into it once. We now see that it was nonsense, and we'll never do it again. I mean, that could also be the answer.
But
to
it's
it.
a breach.
Yes, but-
It's a breach in the freedom of creation. Yes.
But you remember all the demonstrations and people died to protest against this pseudo film because it was not even a real film about the Prophet, the life of the Prophet. 3 years ago, there were demonstrations from Pakistan to Morocco, and some people died in it, and so for a stupid,
it's just a trailer.
very bad movie. And I think the film industry now is under threat from having this kind of pressure anytime it touches a controversial subject. And I think this is really a dangerous escalation.
It was the week when Vladimir Putin hit a wall. The Russian currency taking its biggest single-day drop since 1998. At one point on Tuesday, it was down 20%, with oil prices plummeting and Western sanctions biting. The ruble losing nearly half its value against the dollar since the month of June. The Russian president's response, defiance towards the West. And there you see the cartoon in the Telegraph. I didn't have a sixpence for the Christmas pudding, so I put in 7,000 rubles. Yes, Vladimir Putin responding at his annual end-of-year Kremlin press conference.
Sometimes I think to myself, maybe our bear just needs to sit quiet, not to chase piglets and pigs through the taiga, but to eat berries, honey, and maybe then he will be left alone? No, he won't, because they will always try to put him on a chain, and once they succeed, they will rip out both fangs and claws. What I'm really talking about when I say fangs and claws is our nuclear deterrence. And if this happens, God forbid, the bear will no longer be needed, and the taiga will be taken over.
All right, some flowery imagery. Nonetheless, should we be laughing? He mentions bears and nuclear deterrence in the same breath.
At that very moment, I understood that he was nervous and stressed. Just before he was laughing, you know, he was quite calm. But as soon as he started to speak about bear and chains, so I understood that it's going to be really a disaster. Because we heard, I don't know, like 12 times the word crisis, and we cannot avoid it. But he said we will unavoidably we will overcome crisis, he said. But in this connotation is kind of a bad connotation, you know, it's something negative. And so, we didn't understand what's going on just until he started to speak about this bear, and we understood about these external enemies. So he came back to his rhetoric, and what I was thinking that he doesn't understand really much in economic, because each time he was speaking about ruble, gas, and all, he was coaching like this, and as soon as he was starting speaking about Ukraine and United States, he was like, you know, ready to fight and ready to answer.
It was there's 1 week after he made his big State of the Nation speech at the Kremlin. Of course, what had changed in the interim was that Black Tuesday for the Russian currency.
You know what I was noticed in Tuesday, when you should pay 100 rubles to buy €1. And at that interview, yesterday's interview, when he was asked about Sechen's salary, and he thought, I even don't know my salary. And so I was calculating with this currency exchange, and now people have their pension like €200. And your president, just in front of all the nation, tells us that he doesn't know his own salary, and you think how to struggle, how to prepare your meals for New Year. It's really very rude, I think. So it's just, I was not ready to hear. And I heard many jokes from Vladimir Putin, but this was really the toughest one, I guess.
And yet he's still very popular.
He is really popular. But you know what is the problem with Vladimir Putin? His popularity is just reflected his legacy. I mean, as soon as he's out of power or somebody else coming, this popularity doesn't exist. He is popular because he is on stage now. It doesn't represent anything, because this 80% Russians support Vladimir Putin. You know, these polls, we don't know how it's done. It's there is two different opinions. 94% of Russians get their information from TV, which is controlled by state. You know, it doesn't represent anything.
Pierre, HASKI, we saw this week the images of people rushing into stores to buy goods. The Apple suspending, I guess, sales, online sales in Russia of products because the price of the ruble plunging. Is this the time to hit the pause button on sanctions? Maybe you shouldn't push Russia too far.
I agree with that. I think we're faced, the external world, and mainly Europe and the US, we're faced with two options. One is the Cold War option, which is to impose new sanctions and push Putin to the brink. And the other one is to say, okay, he's in a weak position, definitely, partly because of his own strategy, partly because of the oil price, which is an outside reason. Isn't it time to maybe have a frank and clear discussion with him, disengage from Ukraine because it's his own interest if he wants to calm things down, and de-escalate what has been happening in 2014? Maybe it's the right time for that. I don't know if Putin is ready for that. It doesn't show signs of it, but you don't know what's happening in the background. Maybe he's more nervous than if he was hunting a bear.
Hunting a bear in the taiga. Pierre HASKI, Elena SERVETTAZ, Ammar, RABBO, and Anne BAGAMERY. Thank you. Stay with us. There's more to come. You're watching France 24.